Thanks very much, Kathy. You know, I was thinking about this panel. It's a really hard panel to moderate, I think, for two reasons. First, my brother was saying to me the other day, you know, as a moderator, you really want to get sparks flying and drive disagreement and fights. And I was thinking, you know, it's kind of hard when your topic is civility. We'll see how we do here. But second, it's really an extraordinary group of three individuals for this discussion. And in one of our planning calls, I can't remember which of you said it, but one said, you know, we shouldn't just talk for an hour, we should talk for a day. So I think it's going to be a really good discussion. If you Google civility right now, there's no end of current stories on the subject. I saw three just in the last week that I thought were relevant. There's two kinds of civility. One is almost etiquette, you know, how we treat each other sitting at the same table. But the other is how we solve disagreements among ourselves and how you make our society and our workplaces function. And the three stories really struck me as being very different. One was in a Starbucks in Palo Alto, California, where a woman saw someone wearing, an elderly man wearing a MAGA cap and started berating him and said he should be fired and his children should be killed, and she was going to picket his house. This was all filmed, put on social media. She then started to get death threats. Second was in San Francisco, another crazy Northern California story, my part of the world, where a guy walking down the street in San Francisco knocked a MAGA hat off somebody's head, and the guy turned around, pulled out a sword, and basically severed his arm. Really extraordinary story. Third was in the Post this week, an article about the University of Michigan and a group of students there who've formed a civility organization which they call a space for reasoned conversation, where the rules are to emphasize facts, ban personal attacks, and respect ideological opponents. So a lot going on in the space and people thinking about this. I thought we might start, Irma, you know, you lead a large campus right here in Northern Virginia. How do you see this playing out on your campus? Do you have these kind of disputes where speakers are shouted down? How do you maintain an environment where that doesn't happen?
Thank you, Mark. Well, good morning, fellow women leaders. Congratulations to you for being here today. Big shout out to each one of you. So the topic of civility is very much front and center for us. These days there have been numerous incidents, even resulting in death. There was one here in Charlottesville a few years past, and most recently at the UW. We'd never heard much happening at the UW until recently in terms of lack of civility, because that had not been a problem until recently, more recently. The Marymount University, for those of you that don't know, was founded in 1950 by the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary in a beautiful campus that used to be the weekend home of Admiral Rixey. And he was the Surgeon General for President Theodore Roosevelt. It's gorgeous, beautiful location. 17 acres nestled in Northern Virginia. The sisters' core values are intellectual curiosity, service to others, and global awareness. So what is interesting about these core values is that intellectual curiosity, which is really the basis of academia, it's what sets the platform for discussion of ideas with mutual respect. So we expect people in the academe to disagree with each other, but we've created a platform for respectfully disagreeing. So that kind of sets the stage. The idea of service to others is really one that enables you to really put yourself in someone else's shoes. And by serving them, you intentionally want to understand their perspectives and see the world through their eyes. And then global awareness, which is one very important core value for us, where we really encourage students. Just during spring break, I had 300, so 10% of our student body use their spring break to study abroad or serve abroad. And this perspective where you are really pushing your boundaries and going somewhere else and really trying to see the world from, you know, how someone else in the world would see it. So these are all intentionally created so our students, while we respect their views, we encourage that they put themselves in a position where they are going to really try to understand other views. And that's why I think, to your article that Mark sent us a lot of homework, so we had to prepare for today, the article in the Washington Post, that our students want that. They want to have an environment where there is a civil discourse and where people are encouraged to present their views with respect.
Thanks.
So there.
You know, Doug, you've spent 30 years, you know, getting to yes, and the more local it is, the harder it is. I saw your knowing smile when Kathy referred to my experience on the Planning Commission in California. At Leadership Greater Washington, you assembled cohorts of leaders from disparate parts of the community to build bridges for communication among people who wouldn't normally interface with each other, but where there was a lot they could do together once they found each other. Has that gotten easier or harder to find people willing to do it? How's the environment within the cohorts now? Are people more reluctant or more willing to talk openly? How do you see this evolving in the space where you're working right now?
Mark, thank you very much. First, let me say thank you all for being here. Thank you for having us here to speak with you. I want to congratulate the last speaker, General Bannister. What a wonderful talk. What a wonderful example she is. And I was really struck by her comment of behind every strong woman is a strong woman. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me of the old adage that Connie Morell, the former congresswoman, said so many times, behind every strong man is a surprise mother-in-law. It's true in my case. What's interesting today, David Brooks from New York Times is writing a lot about society and what holds society together and what we need to do. And he's come up with this concept of weavers. Who are the weavers in our communities that are holding us all together, bringing us all together? And I think Leadership Greater Washington is one of those weavers, where we are reaching out to an extraordinarily diverse group of people, bringing them together to talk about the challenges facing the region, but also to talk about the challenges they face as individuals, both personally and professionally. And what's interesting is I've been there 5 years now, so over those 5 years we've had more and more interest in people applying to the program. But we've also, it's been a little more difficult, I say, for people to open up. I mean, our big thing is our signature program. We get 60 plus leaders from government, business, nonprofits, put them in a class, a 10-month class, 1 day a month, and teach them about the region and get them to bond with each other. And there's a little bit of holding back. It takes some time, particularly for some people who it's almost like they're making a confessional. They stand up and they sort of talk about their political views, and they were very nervous to do this. And we pride ourselves in having a sort of the structure and the space for leaders to be honest with each other, to share with each other, to learn from each other. And it struck me that we need to continue that work and even work harder to get people to open up, to bring that diversity of perspectives that's so important to this region, so that we can be true weavers, as David Brooks says. And as county executive, I mean, the challenge we had all the time was, how do you keep a community together when bad things are happening? And you can't sort of rush out and say, okay, we're all gonna hold hands and sing Kumbaya when this happens. You've got to do that time after time after time in the good times. So when the bad times come, you can continue that. So during the sniper shootings, during the 9/11 attacks, during a lot of things, we had tremendous parts of our community that were terrified. We're very afraid for their personal safety. And you could see sort of the civil order start to crumble a bit. And that, as an elected official, that is particularly the local level. I think one of your top goals is the health, safety, and welfare of your community, but it's also protecting that civil order of having people look out for the neighbors, their friends, people down the street, of not attacking someone because they're wearing the wrong piece of clothing or whatever. I mean, it's a constant discussion to do, because there are so many things that pop up that create that discord, that people sort of revert back to their tribes, that we're seeing too much of lately. Instead of looking at the bigger picture, looking at the bigger us, it's who am I comfortable with, and I'll just hang out with those people, as opposed to challenging myself and trying to learn from the other person's point of view. So Leadership Greater Washington, that's what we do. We work every day to bring people together, to put people out of their comfort zone, and to start thinking themselves in the other person's shoes.
So, not everyone here will be able to participate in the signature program. I was lucky to participate in a very similar program in Northern California 15 years ago. What are the characteristics of the people who are most successful at leveraging that and being the leaders and making that discussion happen so that everyone here can take away from that little piece of the signature program and some thoughts about where to engage and how to engage to make that happen better in our workplaces and our communities?
Well, we look for people who are leaders in their fields, and we go small, medium, large. So we'll have the head of Kaiser Permanente Mid-Atlantic region in our class. We'll have in the same class a one-person doctor office in the class, but she's a leader actually in the medical field in the region. So we go sort of different levels, and we go government, business, nonprofit, education. We sort of hit all cross sectors, cross industries in the region. We're the only group in the region that does that. And so we look for people who are successful in their particular line of business, but also who want to have an impact in the community, who want to do something more than just be successful at work. And what we find is the people who are most successful at LGW come into it with that approach. They're coming into it with the approach of, I'm going to learn about this person. I'm not going to, the first thing we always do when we go to events is basically, who are you? What do you do? And at LGW, we don't tell you that for a while. So you get to meet people on a personal level, and then later you sort of you get the directory that says, okay, here's what they do. And it makes a huge difference, I think, where people tend to relate to each other, form these bonds, these friendships with each other that carry them on to success later on. And what I've also found is if people come into a signature program, our signature class, and view it as a sort of transactional thing, I'm here because I'm going to get more business for myself and make connections, make a network, the class tends to shun them. They tend to isolate them, and it doesn't work. You got to form these relationships, and then the business comes from that. But it's that connection, it's that personal touch that is missing so much in our lives today because everybody's on their phone, everybody's doing Facebook, Instagram. That's how we connect with friends, through our phones, as opposed to sitting down, talking to them, and looking them eye to eye. So we're, again, I hate to keep talking about David Brooks, but this whole Weaver concept is just fascinating to me because it's so necessary in today's society.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you've had an extraordinarily varied career, but right now it might be good to focus on the experience at driving change where a part of a group in our community who were marginalized and demonized, quite literally, became accepted over in a process that you really drove and created, but not always by breaking glass.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk about that challenge of people being able to bring their true self, be their true selves when that's going to be controversial, how to be effective when you're trying to drive a change, what works, what doesn't work, and reflect on that a little bit and what made it happen.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here because I've lived here for years, and this is a hidden gem. Not hidden from you, but hidden from me. I had not heard of this conference until I was invited to speak. And Jasmine and Mark and others said to me, Elizabeth, do you believe in free speech? And I said, of course I do. And they said, well, then do you want to give one? So I said, okay, I'm there.
That's a good line.
What I bring to this discussion is I'm kind of a pinwheel. I'm a little bit like Forrest Gump. So I came out I was aware very young that I was different. I just knew I was. I was about 11. I lived on Vancouver Island in Canada. I had American citizenship, but I was raised in Canada. And it was just a very peculiar difference that evolved, and then the awareness kicked in sort of as a teenager. I was still a nerd. I was very, very innocent, sort of, and all of the stereotypes about LGBT people, that was not me. In many ways, I was sort of the Ellen DeGeneres of the political movement, you know, kind of the girl next door. And what I bring to it is I left home young, and I was not precisely a street kid, but I survived because I knew I was gay. I ended up finishing high school, sort of getting into a program that allowed me to live in 10 countries, in Europe, North Africa, and the United States. And that really exposed me to a variety of cultures. Eventually, after a big law firm stint in which I was a little rat animal because I was one of the first non-Ivy League hires, I went to Santa Clara School of Law in California. You know, I ended up coming to Apple Computer. I was Steve Jobs' lawyer for a moment, and then went on to be John Scully's lawyer. And this was a monumental leap for me, from basically nothing, no resources, putting myself through undergrad and law school, and then ending up at Apple. And I learned a tremendous amount about communication, marketing, branding. And I brought all of that to an organization called the Human Rights Campaign, which we completely rebranded. So, you know, the equal sign, that was all of our branding. And you see it on bumper stickers, and you can now see it around the world, and you can run into people in Cambodia. And what that symbol was very important because it was almost like a wink. It was a secret message to other LGBT people that we're here and it's present. When we talk about civility, civility alone, or civility in its finest form, is not about politeness. It is about creating an atmosphere for a rigorous debate short of war. So we can query as anthropologists or from an intellectual basis, would we have eradicated our original sin in this country of slavery without the Civil War? Would we have eradicated Nazism without World War II? So we can talk about civility, but we also have to talk about what is the role of agitation in combination with civility. Translating that to the corporate structure, so I was at Apple, I headed litigation there for years before coming to Washington to head the Human Rights Campaign. And I think the amazing arc within corporate America is the advent of the employee resource group. So you're seeing two trends go on over the last 30 years. One is some of us were pioneers of this newfangled entity called the Employee Resource Group. And when you think about it, it's a mini version of social unionization. And a lot of for-profit big corporations were terrified of these employee resource groups. But what has happened over time is that social justice and social entrepreneurship has become valued by the rank and file of the amazing millennial and Gen Z strata of generational diversity. So, long story short, we now have the advent of the activist CEO. Mark Benioff is a very, very good example of this at Salesforce. More and more CEOs are stepping out. In the early days, it was companies like Apple, probably because I was there, and bugging the crap out of John Scully, saying, I mean, I made John Scully appear at a gay march on Washington that I didn't ask him to. He called me one morning and he said, I just want to come to that march with you. It was in around 2000, or maybe actually the earlier march. Yes, it was an earlier march in the 90s. And I said, John, are you really sure? Like, do you think the board would like this? Like, what do you think about the executive management team? He said, I feel strongly about this and I want to come. Well, it's the morning of the march. And I said, well, where are you? He said, I'm in Maine. And I said, wait, do you have a plane? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, all right, fly in, meet me backstage. And even there, I'm juggling my role. I was also general counsel of the software subsidiary. So I'm totally out. I'm the anomaly lesbian on the board. You know, I'm beyond being one of the only women, I'm like the lesbian. And so John ends up saying, I feel so strongly about this. So I meet him backstage, and he said, well, I'd like to just go up and see the stage. And I said, John, like we haven't cleared this with anybody. Well, there he goes, up the steps, mounts the stage, goes to the middle of the stage. What's the biggest top of the fold story in the New York Times the next day? John Scully at the gay march. And I went back to Apple. I'm just trying to be the nice lawyer. Boy, I don't know how this happened. And oh my God, all hell broke loose. That was in those days. That was maybe about 1994. I ended up leaving Apple. I ended up fighting tooth and nail. You'd think Apple would have been so open and so amazing, you know, in terms of LGBT rights. Like I had fights with John, but loving fights, and this is civility. These are not easy conversations to say, 40% of our programmers are gay. And he said, what do you mean? I said, go look at them. They have purple hair. They have 5 earrings. Who do you think is building our software? And he goes, oh, that's a very good point. But we had a tremendous struggle to get even domestic partnership coverage instituted at Apple. And it came to a head, and I said, I cannot be here if we don't do it. I literally can't be here, morally, emotionally, practically, and in terms of the practical implementation of benefits in corporate America. And they said, well, that's a little dramatic. And they said, well, it's going to cost a lot. I said, that's ridiculous. The cost will be de minimis. It's symbolic. It's important. It is the most lightning rod kind of loyalty you can instill in the LGBT talent here at Apple. So we created the business case and all of that. And this was very early on. And then John Scully walked into the room one day and said, I want to hear your presentation. There were about 100 gay, employees of Apple. And he said, I just want you to know I've called the board and we're doing this. But let's hear your business case, but we're going to do it. And the tears in that room because of that finally acknowledgement of being a whole person with dignity and a contributor. And that was the watershed. That's when I understood that the answer to advancing LGBT rights was to leap over giants in Congress and work with corporate America. I wrote the Corporate Equality Index, which many of you are familiar with because you're all racing to get 100. And for years, people raced to get, I knew corporate behavior because they just want the 100. They don't know what it means, but they want the 100. And so we ended up implementing, the Corporate Equality Index was revolutionary. It moved like a slow-moving grass fire across every industry and cross geography. And slowly but surely, huge corporations just implemented really fair policies for LGBT employees. And finally,
So you did quiet advocacy. You asked for something that wasn't going to cost anything but was symbolically very important,
Yep.
and moved the world forward. And it wasn't a confrontation and a march at Apple. It wasn't a picketing. It wasn't a
it
blame
wasn't
game.
confrontation, but it is being smart about hitting a discomfort zone at the edge, but playing into the same values. So corporations love a ruler that and they love competition. So it's finding those sort of intersections where you can leverage change, and that was very successful. I've already talked too long, but I'm going to come back to a David Brooks story to also show how you disarm those that don't understand and they just don't get it. And okay, maybe I'll say it quickly. I'm just going to say it fast. My methodology at the Human Rights
Everybody's
Campaign.
happy. Keep going.
So the Human Rights Campaign, we took it from like 5 million. Today it's 80 million in its annual budget. And we established the headquarters building. My technique was at every board meeting to invite someone from the opposition, someone from the Heritage Foundation, Pat Buchanan, and David Brooks. We invited David Brooks. David Brooks is a conservative, but he's sort of mushy too. You know, he is. So we invited David Brooks. He came in absolutely believing that no gay person should serve in the US military, and that certainly these 2,000-year-old laws and the modern evolution of the American expression of that should never be extended to same-gender couples. We had someone just like General Bannister at that meeting. She happened to be gay. She flew choppers. In Afghanistan, she led platoons. She cared about her people, her service members. She was about mission first. And she just said, Mr. Brooks, my people follow me, and I make sure they're safe. I want them to come home. And she was riveting. And then we had a couple of couples talk about the unbelievable burden of not being able to get a license. It wasn't a religious debate. It was a demarcation between religious marriage, which we honor, and religious organizations need to set their own rules, and civil marriage. And I don't mean to diminish it, but you know, there's a fishing license, there's a business license, there's a marriage license. You go up to an old metal table and you get a marriage license. In the beginning of this country, they folded those two rituals together for convenience. There weren't a lot of people here, and so they put that ritual of the register and the license within the church. But it's never been like that in Europe. These are separate issues, and we were able to turn it into a civil notion of marriage. And all of the case law and the progeny that follows from that, and how it applies to children and protection. Well, David Brooks left. Oh my God, he's the biggest gay advocate now. I mean, he went right out of that room.
So, Elizabeth, you could do that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
There's something. One thing that's changed in the public debate today has been the role of social media, because it's very easy to flame people on social media, to inflame passions, to balkanize discussions so that we aren't talking to each other.
Yes.
And there are a lot of bad role models, if we're talking about civility across the society, in terms of making it okay to do that, normalizing that type of conduct. And social media is, perhaps most pronounced with, the rising generation. So maybe, Irma, you could talk about social media on campus and how that is contributing or taking away from building a unified campus environment and experience, and maybe some thoughts about how all of us ought to be thinking about how social media is used and what we ought to be thinking about in our own organizations about it.
So I wanted to kind of underscore that I think one of the important points that Elizabeth, through her advocacy, presented to us is one of our core values, which is the dignity of the human being. And that if we all believe in the bottom of our heart in the dignity of the human being, and that's where the basis for civility really comes from. At Marymount, we have 20% of our student body is international, and they come from 68 different countries. And as you may imagine, the perspectives that they bring to campus are very, very, very varied. So, and they're of different faiths. Only 40% of our students are Catholic. I have 20% of my student body who are Muslim, and Christian, and Jewish, and no faith. And I'm so proud of that we are able to embrace every student at Marymount, which is very different from each other, and find, common ground, because everybody, all our students, faculty, and staff, believe in the dignity of the human being. In terms of social media, I have to tell you, I have a very interesting situation because we have like 5,000 Twitter accounts going around on Marymount. So our faculty, they love to tweet. I have my own Twitter, so if you are taking pictures, I love one. At Dr. Irma Becerra, and I retweet you. And we encourage the expression of ideas. We oftentimes have events. For example, we recently had one. We co-sponsored with John Clay Center, which is really about civility. And it was about the U.S. presence in Syria. Two different perspectives. Should we stay or should we go? And they were both presenting, both of our presenters, one lieutenant colonel from the Army, and he presented his views, and then someone who was in advocacy presenting her view, and a think tank person. So it was very interesting to see these two perspectives, and it really triggers this opportunity to really, for you or students, or even myself, as I'm listening to the discourse, form my own opinion. I think that is important, and sometimes in terms of our leadership at the university, people describe it as herding cats. Because, different than in your corporations, I can never tell a faculty member what to do. I need to win them over, okay? So my leadership requires me to kind of be an advocate for ideas. And we have this new idea about the core curriculum, Mark. What do you think? And they're like, oh, let me think about it. And then, bringing people, so I can never say, oh, why don't we consider adding AI into your course on artificial intelligence, into your course on art appreciation, because if I would tell him that, he'll say no. So this idea that there is a strength in the collective also, where you open your own mind to the ideas of others. So in my leadership style, when I meet with cabinet, I said, well, I think about this way, what do you all think? And I encourage a healthy discussion at our cabinet meetings, because oftentimes I may not, if I don't try to see the problem from different perspectives, in particular when it's a complex problem, I may not make the best decision.
Have you ever had situations at St. Thomas or at FIU or now at Marymount where people have broken that compact and have flamed each other, sent out nasty tweets about each other, or done things that have inflamed an environment on campus where you needed to then figure out how to get people to notch it down?
Yes.
And how did you deal with that?
Well, we had an organization, and when I was at my prior institution, that was one of these extreme. There are many organizations that are extreme, trying to just inject their views, and they had a table, and they were saying like expletives, using foul language about faculty. And of course, the faculty, I was the provost, the faculty marching, oh, that organization has this expletive about faculty. And, you know, I had to tell them, listen, because I encourage free speech, including saying yes to giving a free speech today. But I said to them, you know, the fact that you're using expletives and foul language about faculty, that goes against the dignity of the human being. So you cannot be here. So, you know, it doesn't fit that frame. Yeah. So if you are disrespectful to others, it's okay if you have whatever views you have, but if in the process of expressing your views you're disrespectful, then you don't fit.
I think one of the things we found is that people that are disruptive to the ability to have a conversation, even when they are smart and technically knowledgeable, end up subtracting from the organization, and sometimes it's hard to move them out, but you need to do that.
Correct.
Doug, when you built a lot of things as county executive, both physically and also community-wise. Can you tell us a story about a time that you failed because people weren't able to get to the table and treat each other properly, so that you couldn't get everybody to a point where they were willing to move ahead? And some lessons we might take away from that, things that might have been done differently to get a different outcome.
First, I'm a firm believer if you preach civility, you got to practice it yourself. Mm-hmm. I deleted my Twitter account because I found all I was doing was writing nasty things. It was always about Metro. I just ride Metro every day. It drives me crazy. And I realized this isn't doing anyone any good. And, so I got rid of that. I deactivated my Facebook account over the Christmas time because I was so fed up with Facebook's undermining of democracy around the world and saying, it's not our fault. We have nothing to do with this. So now I'm on Instagram, and when that gets too corrupt, I'll get rid of that too. And maybe start sending out newsletters again, or emails, I don't know. In terms of, in 12 years as county executive, I walked out of only one meeting. And I really view my life as being a community builder. That not just building physical things, but building the structures and the spaces and the networks for people to feel proud about where they live and work. I did that as mayor of Rockville, as county executive. I'm doing that at Leadership Greater Washington. I mean, that's really, again, my life's calling. And it's a fascinating field. I love it. But in the 12 years as county executive, I only walked out of one meeting. And it's sort of similar to what you had said. It was with a group of people. This is in, I think around the year 2000, a little later. So it's not like 1930. We had a serious issue with schools in the county, where the county had grown rapidly, had built a lot of schools, and then all of a sudden the school population was starting to shrink, so they closed a lot of schools. Now we need more schools, but at the time, there were a lot of closed school buildings in the county that were just sitting there rotting, and they became neighborhood nuisances. They became places where people would hang out, drug dealers would hang out, people would sleep, just trash the place. So we went about finding users for these closed schools to sell them to. And I always said the best use of a closed school is another school. So we went to a lot of the private schools in the area and said, hey, we've got this space. Would you want to buy it? You got to fix it up, do other things. So we had a Jewish school that was going to move into a closed middle school. And the neighbors there were just incensed that we were doing this. They could not, and the school was closed. It was just it wasn't anything good. And we needed somebody to come in rather than just tear it down. Let's reuse it. So I was in a meeting with these people, and I sort of asked them, because some of the signs they had put up in the neighborhood was, we don't want those people here. Again, it's 2000. And in the meeting, I asked them about that, and one person sort of said that. And I said, you know what, there's no room for discussion here. See you later. So it was a failure in terms of trying to get this community group to work with us. But a success is we just shoved that school down their throat because we're not going to tolerate that kind of attitude in the county. And I think that's, it's kind of remarkable if you think about it. 12 years of meeting with community groups, the dealings we have with downtown Silver Spring, all that stuff. Nothing ever sort of upset me for me to say I'm leaving, except for this one group. People were, for the most part, civil and willing to listen and talk. But that was, to me, it was a failure. I had to leave the meeting. But again, that school was going in there no matter what. So, and it did, and it's doing great.
So,
yeah, I have one
ahead.
example kind of coming off that one. We're in the middle of the Me Too movement, which I love. I mean, it's like this volcanic explosion of women finally saying enough, like just enough already. And I think our biggest lessons do come from South Africa and Gandhi. So this is the modern, social media isn't all bad. It's what you do with it. Now, here's what's going on with the Me Too movement. So we had all that bliss and, just hanging one guy after another in the public square. Like, that was really fun, I mean, it's so satisfying because we've all put up with such BS, is that okay to say here, for decades and decades. Even I'm the biggest lesbian that ever came out of Silicon Valley. Even I had a guy come on to, I'm like, do you read the newspapers? And I mean, he was really drunk. And I said, put the candy in the wrapper. I don't want to see it. I've never seen it in my life. I don't want to see it now. I do have twins, so I have some affection now, for my twins. I have a boy and a girl, and perfect social experiment. So, but, my point here is that I'm trying to run through my brain. Connie Morella. How do you weave this stuff together? So the danger of, anti-Semitism. So I'm just tracking you. This is the part
She turned to me and said, anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.
Well, that was your example you walked out on. So I'm a sort of airhead in the morning before coffee, but my point is that we have a very intricate thing playing out now at the national level with the women's marches. So you've got the organizing committee that began completely organically with 7 women in New York. Who knows what happened, but the Jewish woman was extricated, right? And there is some affection among one of the leaders for Louis Farrakhan. And you sort of say, okay, what is that all about? That analysis is it is about Farrakhan's style versus Martin Luther King. Or perhaps in our modern day, John Lewis. And it's figuring out 2 things about the Me Too movement. One, if it completely runs amok, we're not gonna have due process for some of these men. We won't. We have to be, at some point, this is fun. I mean, I just love oh my God, get rid of that one and that one. And all this purging is great. But at some point, as a lawyer, we've got to figure out a way for due process. That's one thing. And the second thing is even us as women, we've got the same old foibles and evils that can arise. One of the biggest precursors to strife and war eventually is anti-Semitism. It's a kind of early indicator. If you look at the if you look for 2,000 years, but the late 19th century leading up through the Weimar Republic into World War II, it's something we as women, we've got to crack open a better solution. And I think our lessons can be from countries like South Africa. Truth and reconciliation was not perfect in South Africa, but it was a completely different model than the Nuremberg rallies. And it was a way to start to surface these truths and resentments and anger and economic disparity. And I don't want to make it all about Jews and African Americans, because it's about the many, many paths that we bring in our experience to being women. We have to continue to pioneer a better way.
What I hear, and I see that our time is wrapping up.
Yeah.
But what I've heard from each of you, and my takeaway is that the way to accomplish this is the only thing to be intolerant of is intolerance. Yes. And if we keep that in mind, we can continue to move things forward. That gets nods from everybody?
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Well, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being
Thank you
such
for
great
having us.
listeners.
Thanks. So great to be. I love hanging out with you.
Thank you. Good job.
If you just stay for a moment, we do have a couple of questions for you.
Oh, great. Okay,
Hey,
good.
Mark.
I thought we were.
You got the hook,
told
so
to-
I had 3 more minutes on the agenda.
Great to see you.
You too. Mark
We
and I go
worked
back.
together for years.
Oh my God, we go back, what, 30 years? No,
probably 25.
25,
Yeah.
and we haven't seen each other in a while. That's great. Good to see you too. I had a question for Irma, because you're right at the front and center of Gen Z and the remainder of the millennial generation. What do you see? I feel like the sensitivity to civility is different in the various generations. What are your observations?
I think our students, which by the way, all the negativism that has been around millennials and Gen Zs, I don't share it. I think our students are extraordinary. They really, really are. They really are. And that's why I'm in this job. I see a generation that is deeply committed to these issues of social justice, making a difference, making this world a better place, fixing the environmental mess that we've left behind. And I mean, it's a deep commitment. It's not this, it's a deep commitment. So I feel very excited about the future, because we've told them, this world is in your hands, you can make a better world, and they believe it and they're doing it. This is a group that, yes, we are preparing them for careers, preparing them for life, preparing them for being entrepreneurs, and they feel very comfortable with the possibilities that this new economy, the gig economy, presents to them. It's just so much out there. They love to take advantage of the global globality of our economy, and they're very excited about. I see it with my own kids. They're avid travel. They love to travel. They love to see the world. They love to understand it and experience it. And I think it's a very exciting time. I think it's very important that as a nation we understand some of the difficult things that other countries are going through. What are the causes for immigration? Nobody likes to leave their country. You know, if this situation that happened in Cuba 60 years ago, where a really tyrannical man took over and destroyed a country, would not have happened, I'd still be living in Cuba. Well, who knows? But what I'm saying is, when you see people that are trying to, you know, lugging their 6 months old and they're walking to get out of their country, is because their situations in their countries are untenable. And we need to be sensitive to what's going on, the violence, drug dealers, you know, what happened in Cuba continues to happen in many other countries, Venezuela, Latin America. We just can't say, well, we're good here. I think it's really our responsibility to the world that we continue to understand what's happening and help countries that are not in the privileged situation that we are.
No. So I just want to add something to that. So I'm very excited about the future generation. I am very excited about the people that are coming up, my kids and a lot of others. And where I've seen it in Leadership Greater Washington is our slogan used to be, this is before I got there, but our slogan used to be the best networking in town. And our younger members, our newer members, the latest classes have said that's not enough. You know, networking's good, but we need to do more. We need to have some kind of impact. So we've gone into these deep dives into issues. We've become an advocate on certain things. We're becoming a much more vocal or visible organization, because the younger members have said, you just can't network. You got to have an impact in the community. So our slogan now is great minds for a greater purpose. I mean, that sort of encapsulates what we are trying to do now. But it's all coming from the millennials and the people behind them.
And that's a perfect segue to this question, which is, what advice do you have for young women interested in running for office?
I always say run. I mean, that's
the
the best thing is run.
Drill, baby, drill. Run, baby, run. Like, that's what should happen.
I'm a huge fan of people running for elective office. It's a challenge. But if you want to do it, don't say, well, I'll wait my turn. Your turn is now. I mean, nobody's going to give you something in politics, trust me. You've got to take it. So you've got to run. I mean, clearly work on some campaigns, do different things, but run. And actually, I got so frustrated in 2016, I said, I'm only voting for female candidates.
That's what I do.
I just got so upset. And I'm sorry to say, the Democratic Party in Maryland just crushed female candidates that year. Hillary Clinton was the only one who won the primary. The candidates for everything else, Senate, for House, for whatever, all lost. And that's a challenge that we've got. The Democratic Party has it. The Republican Party, it's a whole different matter. But the Democratic Party has a real challenge of trying to open up leadership spots for people. And the only way to do it is to run. Get involved in campaigns, and then run yourself. Pick something you think you want. I started off with the Rockville City Council. You know, spent $2,000 on my first election, and came in 4th out of 10 people. The top 4 won, and I went from there. So it just run. Get some friends together and say, I'm going to run for this, and go for it.
And I was just going to say that it's absolutely essential women run, but it's also essential we take it to the next level to hold corporations and other institutions accountable for women on the executive team and the boards. It's just too skewed.
I will tell you, at Cisco, our executive leadership team, the team that reports to our CEO, is now 7 men and 5 women. It was 6-6, but we had to move around. Our board was 4 out of 11 women, but one of the women ended up becoming an executive at the company, so we're 3. And it really has a striking impact on the types of issues that come up in the company and the way issues get resolved. In fact, it was funny, at a board meeting, there was an issue being discussed, and then there was a break for, normal break during the day, and then people came back in, and our lead independent director, who happened to be a woman, said, Amy and Michelle and I were talking in the ladies' room, and here's what we think we should do.
That.
And I thought, this is really something when the ladies' room is a center of power in the board of a Fortune 50 company. The tone at the top matters.
Yeah, I want one little thing about generational analysis, like just to be clear, because you're all leaders in corporate America. Millennials and Gen Z are very different. Gen Z, the latest, digital natives, they're way more like boomers. They are really nervous about economic security. They went through 2008. They watched their parents lose their homes, their jobs. So while they're wildly purpose-driven, like millennials, in terms of security measures, I think you're going to see a lot more Gen Z have longevity at corporations and be looking for loyalty both ways. You know, to them in understanding them, but also for security. So a lot of this corporation hopping is going to curb, I think.
Well, there's a lot of pushing that needs to be, if you don't mind me saying this, Yasmin. Yeah. Our Chief Human Resources Officer, Fran Katsoudas, was on CNBC 2 days ago, and you can look it up and watch it on YouTube. And one of the things Fran was talking about was pay parity, and making the point that we had moved, even though it's not required by law in a lot of states, to stop asking people what they made before. And the way she put it is, if you ask people what they made before, you may give everyone a raise coming in, and you just perpetuate what has gone on in the marketplace before.
Exactly.
And you come up with a justification for it. And it was really necessary internally for people to organize and make that point so that Fran would adopt that and it would become our policy across the company. But it was a general discussion about pay parity and issues that you might find interesting to listen to.
But I also, if I may, I want to point out, and I want to really applaud corporations. They've come such a long way since I was an engineer at Florida Power and Light. And I think I had 2-week maternity leave when I had my son. And you know, the possibilities that technology have given us in terms of, you know, working in a much more flexible way. I used to spend 14 hours in the computer room coding, and you know, when I was called, I used to, because I was had to be on a beeper for, you know, the system broke down, I had to drive there 45 minutes. So much has happened that has really allowed not only women but men have a lot more balance, lifestyle, and a lot more engaged with their families, and I just think it's phenomenal, because in my life as I look at how things are today, I go, wow, I would have stayed in corporate if I would have known they were going in that direction. But
it's getting better, but men still don't take the flex time like women do. And I think you should all run a campaign in your corporations called Real Men Flex. And you do a muscle. And
Well, on that note, we are going to have to wrap, because we could keep going forever. Really, really rich dialogue. I want to thank you. A couple of things I think to take away is find that opportune moment to create change when it's a mutually beneficial situation, and go for it. Drive that change, whether it's being in office, being in academia, being in corporate. Speak up, call people out. We heard that too. Be your true self, but then speak up if someone is really not doing the right thing. This is the time to do it. So can't thank you enough for this really rich dialogue. Thank you so much.
thank you.